Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we explore the intersection of storycraft and game design. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Susan O'Connor, an outstanding game writer and narrative designer who has worked on some of the most iconic titles in the gaming world, including BioShock, Far Cry, and Tomb Raider. With over 25 projects under her belt and a knack for telling unforgettable stories, Susan's insights into narrative design are always invaluable. Today, she's joined me to illuminate a topic that's been buzzing on social media. What the hell is a narrative designer anyways? So, let's get at it. Susan, thank you for joining me once again.
Oh, my pleasure, Gerald. I love being here.
You are a hard lady to nail down, but when I get a chance to talk with you, I am so excited to pick your brain because you know so much. And you're the perfect person for the topic I want to tackle today, because I've had a number of people give me different inputs, but I'm curious, what the hell is a narrative designer, like technically? So we're gonna dig into that. But before we do, you've been here before, so we have the whole, this is who Susan O'Connor is. But can you give me a Cliff Cole's short version of how you fell in love with gaming and writing, the girl slumber party story, all of that fun stuff?
Sure, of course. So as you guys know, I guess I'll just say this part first, and then I'll do a sort of quick view. But I am the founder and CEO of the narrative department, and we help writers fast track their game writing careers through our courses and coaching. And it's been a real labor of love, because I built the narrative department because I used to need the narrative department, and it didn't exist when I started out. After I always knew my whole life I wanted to be a writer. Like from the age of 4, I got the memo. And when I graduated from college, I only knew 2 things. 1, I wanted to be a writer still. And 2, I wanted to stay here in my hometown of, it's now my hometown of Austin, Texas. And, when I looked at writing jobs, they all seemed to be in either New York or LA, both of which are great places. Neither are places I wanted to live. I mean, I was still like, I was in my 20s. My friends were everything. I'm like, why would I ever live? I love queso and breakfast tacos. I can't imagine life without them. So it took a minute to figure out a role for me, a place for me. But through a search, I tripped over a small game studio here in Austin. And they were making, this is how old, I'm going to date myself. These games were on CD-ROM. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And they were making a game based on a board game. It was called Girl Talk. And it was a slumber party game for girls. And of all the people who applied for this job, I was the only one who had ever been at a slumber party. I was the only woman who applied. So I was a subject matter expert in all things slumber party. I know what girls do, a lot of giggling, a lot of talking, a lot of nonsense, and I can write nonsense all day long. So that was my big glamorous break into the world of video games. And at the time, I just was like, sure, let's give it a shot. And what ended up happening is I worked there for few years. It was so much fun. Kids' games are a great place to cut your teeth as a game writer. I know it's really tempting to be like, I want to work on the games I love, so I'm dying to work on Last of Us or whatever. But for people who are breaking in, I'm like, don't sleep on things like kids' games, because they're really fun. They're low pressure compared to a AAA title, and kids are a real forgiving audience. They don't get on Reddit and complain if your game isn't like A++++. So I worked there for a little while, and then we were acquired. And then as night follows day, we were laid off. And I got a severance package of $30,000. And I said, in my utter wisdom, 27-year-old wisdom, I never have to work again. I'm rich. Look at all this money in the bank. So while I sat around and ate queso and rode my bike around, my smarter friends who had also gotten laid off got jobs at studios, other game studios, which ended up working in my favor, because when those studios needed a writer, my friends remembered me and said, I know someone who's a lot of fun at parties and knows how to write her way out of our paper bag. So to anyone who gets laid off, secretly, I'm always like, congratulations, your opportunities are about to explode. Right. So I started getting more opportunities through my friends, and one thing led to another. And before you know it, I was working on Gears of War. So there's a direct line from a girls' slumber party to Gears of War, everybody.
I love
and then
that.
it's insane. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's 4 people having an adventure together.
Yep.
And then from there, did BioShock and, worked on games for a really long time and learned a lot. And I learned it all the hard way by screwing up, making mistakes, trial and error. And the narrative department is designed, the fast track part of it comes from like, let me teach you what I wish I had known back in the day.
Nice. So the narrative department is the lion's share of your life, but are you still consulting on games? Do you still do a little side work?
100%. Oh, yeah. I mean, I love it. And honestly, it's the same work, because consulting is just teaching by another name. Right. In fact, without giving any names away, I was just doing a consultation with the team. So what they usually do is bring me in to first read what they've got and give my feedback. And then based on that feedback, we do a workshop to solve whatever problems got surfaced through the review. So I did a review of a team's work, and then we had a call scheduled. And one of the first faces that appeared on the video call was an alumni from T&D.
That's cool.
And for a second, I was like, am I on the wrong call? Am I supposed to be in class right now? Wait, I thought I was doing this. So that's what I love about T&D is that I get to keep supporting students even when they are, off in a studio. It's really wonderful to be able to pop up and support them because creative work, it's always a group effort and just, yeah. Anyway, small world.
Indeed. Well, I mean, before we move into the topic of the day about narrative designers, the narrative department community is a family, like people who have gotten inside and share and support each other and celebrate each other's wins and give tips and connections. It's a family. Like, it's so cool.
I know it really is. And I can't believe it, to be totally honest. I mean, I'm really proud of the curriculum and of the things that we teach. I mean, it's like I said, it's all based on things that narrative directors have said. This is what writers need to know. So I know it's rock solid and it's really good material. And like the best part of the class is the people who take it. And that sounds so corny, but I remember the first time I taught the class, I couldn't believe how great the group was. And I just thought, God, I lightning struck. Like, I lucked out with this group. I don't know how these people found us, but thank God they did. And then the second time I taught it, I'm like, wait a minute, these people are also incredible. What are the odds of this happening twice? And the third time it happened, I literally, I'm not kidding, Gerald, I went out and I bought a lottery ticket. I'm like, I'm the luckiest person on the earth. And now I just don't even question it. I don't get it, and I don't question it. I think that writers are just, I mean, I'm one of them, so it's like game recognized game. And I think that writers are so creative and smart and curious and wonderful and get such little support in our culture, and being able to offer a place where what they have to give is so valued and held in high esteem. And the whole focus is like, let's just help you do what you were meant to do. And it's really wonderful. And yeah, the students really do make it because they all, like you said, they help each other. Mm-hmm. It's it's not a competitive group. I mean, even if we have 400 alumni, they're not all going for the same job. Writers are so different and they have such different interests. And, I've seen people, say like, okay, I applied for this job, but other people should apply for it too.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
It's amazing.
Isn't it? And they'll apply for the same job and they'll be like, hey, I'm cheering you on, like, and mean it. Like, yes. So cool.
I know. And especially now that T&D is a few years in, I'm excited to see it evolve because our earlier students are working in the industry and they're moving up the ranks. And that's who's going to be hiring writers, and I just love this idea of this community growing in that way.
Okay. Well, we're going to put a pin in the narrative department stuff. We'll touch on it, I'm sure, as we move through. But let's move into the topic of the day. So like you mentioned, there's a lot of writers, like good, solid, like the writers I met in T&D are incredible. But there's also folks like me who also have that game design side that need to play with mechanics and crunch and figure out balance. And in the middle somewhere there's this nebulous thing called a narrative designer. And I've heard definitions from various folks, working narrative designers and people outside the industry. I want that's why we're here today. So to dig us into this, I guess Let's start with what, in your opinion, is a narrative designer? What makes their role different than other writing titles?
Yes. So I do want to plus one what you just said, which is you're going to hear lots of different definitions from people, and no one's definition is right or wrong. We don't have a codified understanding in this industry about job titles. So it's really helpful, I guess, especially for people who are looking for jobs, to know that one studio's game writer is another studio's narrative designer. So the trick is you can't get too hung up on the job titles per se. You have to look at what the work description is. Like, here's what you would do in the day. So that said, I do want to acknowledge that I think there is a distinction between game writers and narrative designers. So when, okay, this is an oversimplified definition, but here's how I think about it. Game writers are responsible for the who and the why. Like, who meaning the characters, why meaning the themes and the motivation, sort of like your classic story stuff, right? And narrative designers, there's overlap with that work, but their primary focus is the how. How are we going to tell this story? So there's a really awkward phrase, but helpful, from Robert McKee about this idea of like a good story, well told.
Mm-hmm.
Game writers come up with a good story. Narrative designers tell it well.
Clever.
Yeah. And I think obviously there's overlap, for sure. But narrative designers are much more comfortable, in my experience, getting under the hood, sitting with, right next to the level designers, talking about where they're going to place, dialogue prompts and whatnot. There's different degrees of technical comfort and expertise, but I think the thing to look for is, if you're an early career person and you're like, well, which camp do I land in? It really comes down to what draws you. Like, I was always a game writer. That's really where my strength lay, and that's where I had something valuable to offer to the team. And there's a role for someone like me on a team. And there's a role for someone who can do that kind of almost simultaneous translation between story and design, which is great. They're both very valuable, and I think there's no point pretending to be something you're not. Part of exploring, getting to know what you have to offer is like honing in on, like, again, not your expertise, but your passion, because your passion will lead you to develop expertise.
To help me clarify a little bit, I heard you say something in class a couple times that really stuck with me. You said lots of things in classes that stuck with me, but one thing was that telling a story in a game can quite often be you create a story and then you chop it into parts and you hide the parts in the world and you hope the player finds them in a certain order possibly, but if not, then they still have to work. Is that writing or is that narrative design, that process of putting the story in the world? Yes,
I love that. So let's talk about that for a second. I'll unpack it just a little bit, and then we'll. But the short answer is both. So the idea, which is annoying maybe, but it is. So yeah, because then you get to work together. I mean, game writers and narrative designers like each other a whole lot, so they get along really well. But this idea, which I think is so important, which is this idea of push storytelling versus pull storytelling. So let's use like old-fashioned, your parents' television experience as an example. Mm-hmm. Watching a TV show and then having to watch ads is a perfect example of push storytelling. You'd really rather not see the ads, but like, here we go, right?
Right.
And in a lot of ways, that same level of like happens when people play a game, which is then interrupted by a cutscene. That is an example of push storytelling. We are pushing the story on you, whether you like it or not. And of course, gamers are like, I don't like it. X.
Yep.
I mean, it's Pavlovian almost at this point. So, you can't fight it. I mean, I'm a game writer and I skip cutscenes, it's not a good fit for the playing experience. So a much better model for storytelling in games is this pull model, which is, you just alluded to, which is there's a story here. And if you want, it's here if you can find it. And what's really good about the psychology of that for players is that it makes story a gameplay reward. If you're willing to go out and explore and find and fight and do things, you find the audio log or whatnot. And some players never make the effort and they sort of blaze through the game and they have a great experience. But the people who go to the trouble of uncovering that story for them, it's just a completely different, deeper level and really satisfying gameplay experience for them because they've basically raised their hands and said, hi, I like story. In which case the game's like, great, there's a story here. Come find it.
Is it possible that based on what parts of the story they find, you get a different narrative experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where, to get back to the original question, this is where the game writing and narrative design really need to work together. Because you can imagine how complicated this can be to slice and dice up something like this. So what I thought was so smart about BioShock, which is where I really saw this concept in action for the first time, but it's not the only time. I think there's other games that use this model as well. Mm-hmm. You're discovering a world rather than one character storyline. So that takes out the problem of making sure they get a beginning, middle, and end. Right? It's like it's the world, and a little bit about it or a lot. Mm-hmm. And there might be little mini storylines in there with beginning, middle, and ends, but they're small and they're self-contained, and you would work with the narrative designer and the rest of the people in the team to think through, and of course there's loads of testing and play testing too, to make sure this is all landing. It's a really complicated Rubik's Cube, but really it's a fun puzzle. I think narrative designers do a lot of puzzle solving.
You mentioned BioShock, which is kind of, back in your earlier, not too long ago, but earlier years. Well, how have you seen the role of narrative designers change over that time? Has it become more of a respected position? Has their duties changed in some major way?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, narrative design wasn't really a job title. The work was getting done, but it was usually getting done by the designers and the design team. Okay. Which makes sense. They're closer to the engineering side. They're more hands-on with the maps and whatnot. So, it was just really easy for them to get in there, right, which was great. But the issue was that designers are focused on design, not story. They are solving for design problems, not story problems. And so they sometimes would just wade in and solve problems, not realizing they were breaking story stuff.
Right.
And not meaning to, but also not really caring. It's not their job, So it kind of left the game writers a little bit hamstrung. It was like, how do I do good work? I don't know how, because everything I do is getting undone for good reasons. I can't tell them not to. So yeah, it was a communication problem and it was a process problem. And so narrative designers are so tremendously helpful. Again, I've seen it in different roles at different studios, but one narrative designer that I worked with was really kind of like a simultaneous translator, like in the United Nations, those people who can listen to Russian and say it in English.
Yeah.
Their brains do that somehow. It's incredible. I would see these narrative designers, they would go to design meetings and intentionally advocate for the narrative. In other words, explain so that the designers had more context for what they were doing. And then they would come to the writer meetings and they would advocate for design because somebody needed to be able to hold both things in their head.
Yeah.
And it gave room for the writers to have the luxury of only thinking about story and the designers only thinking about design and knowing that someone was there to help them connect and interweave, So
it sounds like somebody who really needs a good grasp of the big picture, the vision of the overall finished product in order to bring those pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're working on moment by moment things, but you've got to see the big picture. Absolutely.
Somebody in that role, just to kind of dig into under the hood for a bit, what kind of core responsibilities? Because it sounds like there's a little bit of level of design, there's a little bit of quest design, and then there's still writing involved, and world and lore and all of that. What kind of rubber hits the road? What are the role? What's the duties?
So the duties, and I hate to be annoying, it's always
everywhere.
Yeah, it's different every time. I know, it's so boring. It's like it needs to be a bell sense that I ring. But the designer that I'm thinking of, his background was in level design, and then he's now a narrative director, but he has the chops for that. So I think thinking back on it, we would have these story meetings and we would talk about what needed to happen narratively. And we would talk about what was happening for the player's experience. how far along are we in the game at this point? What does the player know how to do? What's the vibe, for lack of a better word? I mean, one of the ways I really advocate for the value of story in games is like, the game writer isn't responsible for words so much as like the emotional journey of the player.
Mm-hmm.
More than anyone else on the team, I think that's the role of the writer, to like support that and shepherd that and make that possible. So, so the narrative designer would want to be able to sit with the writer and talk shop about like quote unquote pure story stuff, character motivation and yada yada, things like that. And also share with that writer, okay, here's what's going on in terms of the systems and mechanics at this point in the game. Yeah. And make sure that the writer gets it, not to the degree of the designer, but, enough to be able to, okay, I see the constraints, or I see the other factors at play here. So the skills at play there are like really strong knowledge of how stories work, right? Really good communication skills, really good collaborative skills, because both writing and design are high concept and invisible for a large period of the cycle. And so you've really got to push to be able to get clarity on stuff. So really patient, and just, again, a really good communicator, which means good listener. Thanks. And then when you sit with the designers, of course, you've got to be able to speak design. So you've got to have some kind of strength in there. So I think whether you are naturally a designer or a writer, you just have to have a really vested interest. A level designer needs to be able to like talk shop with writers, and a writer needs to have a really deep interest in design and some training in it. So you've got to have that cross-disciplinary expertise, a double major, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
And then you are doing problem solving, right? So you sync up with both people, you get their creative visions, which start out in alignment and quickly fall out of alignment. And then all you're doing is pushing them back into alignment. So it's a combination of technical skills, like getting stuff into the game or helping someone get stuff into the game in a way that was intended. And so there's a certain amount of technical chops involved there, and that can be to a greater or lesser degree. You can be the one doing it, or you can be sitting next to the one doing it. But either way, you want to be involved. And then as friction points arise, navigating that, which again requires diplomacy, and again, good communication. Can't say that one enough.
So with so many pieces they need to worry about, how does somebody prepare for such a role? I come out of university and whether I'm a designer or I'm a writer, and I'm like, I want to become a narrative designer. Mm-hmm. How do you prepare for that? Like, what's the path? And I'm sure, again, it depends and it's different. But
I know. Well, if I were, okay, so let's just take this. Let's just say, okay, I just graduated. I just feel like games are a medium like no other. It is so cool. I really want to explore what it means to tell a story in a game. And this is where I think if you're interested in becoming a narrative designer, it is such an exciting time, because here's why. So I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to answer that question. So the reason I think narrative design, now's the time, is because the audience is really ready for what only games can do when it comes to storytelling. So, I talk in the class about this idea of like, whenever a new storytelling medium comes along, like two things happen. One, the artists that are working in the new medium kind of bumble around and make stuff, and it's not very good because they don't know what they're doing yet, but they're having fun doing it, right? And then the artists that are working in the dominant medium of the day get real inspired by the crazy stuff that the other people are doing, and they start borrowing it or stealing it. So like if you go back to like novels from the early 20th century, you'll see cinematic techniques at work in the prose, like flashbacks and close-ups and things. We don't even see it with our 21st century eyes, but to someone back then, it was like, whoa. Yeah. And a similar thing happens with games. I think when games first started, video games specifically, it was just a lot of like, I don't know, let's just try some stuff. I mean, I was definitely part of that generation, and we were just throwing all the spaghetti against the wall. And it was so much fun. And we also, let's face it, made some garbage and whatever. How else are you going to learn, right? Yeah. So we were just bumbling along. And for stories, we didn't really know how to tell stories in the games, and our players didn't. They were like, what's going on? So borrowing from movies made a lot of sense. in the same way that early filmmakers just put the camera in the 10th row of the theater and film the play. And that makes sense because the people making it, that's how they understand story, and the audience, that's how they understand story, meaning the consumption of story. But eventually the audience outgrows it, right? And so do the creative people. And they're like, okay, isn't there more we could do here? What if we tried this, right? And what if I took this camera and I pushed it up real close up next to your face? What if we tried that? Same thing is happening in games. I think that players are so smart and they're so savvy and they're so experienced with games, and they don't need the story spoon-fed to them in cutscene form. They want to explore. They want to co-create the narrative. They're okay with being confused for long periods of time. It's part of the fun of discovery. And so we've really only scratched the surface of how to tell a story in a game. I think the kind of innovations we're going to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years are just going to be mind-blowing. I'm here for it.
Mm-hmm. Not to want completely down a sidetrack, though, what do you think that's going to do to just traditional narrative structures? Like, suddenly, what does that do to the 3-act structure and the need for climax and denouement? And what is that going to do? Like,
yes. Well, I'll get back to the question about how to learn. I've forgotten it. I know. It's my fault. I'm like, so I'll get back to that. But to answer this question of how will it affect,
especially the Western storytelling? Like, our storytelling so structured. This is going to, anyways. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, it is. So I think that it's really interesting. I mean, film had to kind of find its own language. I mean, if you watch films from like the 1930s or 40s, they feel off because the particular way in which we do the 3-act structure in film hadn't been codified yet. And so we're almost like waiting for like the moment that we've been trained to experience. I mean, Quentin Tarantino's talked about this idea, like audiences are practically lean to the right at the moments that they're supposed to lean to the right. Like, we are very trained.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we are going to, I think at the end of the day, our audience will tell us what they want and what works for them and what they can tolerate and what they enjoy. And here's what I mean by that. Like, when I first started working in games, there was this like idea, like, let's throw the rule book out. Like, no rules matter. We're so brand new, like, bleh. And that sounds great, I guess, sort of. But like, the thing is, whether you're trying to convey a narrative experience through a book or a film or a game, at the end of the day, you're telling it to a human. And humans, our brains are hardwired for story. It is part of how we survive as a species. I mean, for most of our existence on this planet, we didn't have the written words. We had to carry essential information in our brains. And the way our brains evolved to be able to do that, to remember where the tigers lived, which berries were poisonous, etc., was to be able to remember a lot through stories. And so we still think about stories the same way we always have. And we as a species are not evolving fast enough to evolve out of that. So I think that when it comes to the rules, whatever you want to call them, I call them tools, not rules. Yeah. So the 3-act structure tool or whatever, things like that are going to evolve in the realm of games. And I think the rules will bend them, but not break them. That's my thought.
I like it. Yeah. Sorry. Let's get back to the other question.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah, that one.
This is a great question. So if I were 22 years old, just got out of college, love games, love storytelling, really am excited about the possibilities of how to tell stories in games in this whole new way, but didn't know how to get started, which sounds like me in a nutshell back in the day. I mean, I think one of the best places to start is to really start to develop your awareness and appreciation of what's already happening in games. I think that's the best place to ground your narrative design education. So I would, no joke, I really would sit down with games with real intention and like get out a journal. I would start my narrative design journal and I would pick a game that I love because you might as well start with your passions. And I would really dig into that game. Why does this work for me? What is going on with the storytelling in Hades, for example? And I would really capture my own thoughts about it before I went to find any more information. Like, what do I see? What do I observe? what do I think they're doing here? Why do I think it works? And then I would go and I would hunt down like dev diaries. I would find the people who had made the game and I would see if I could find interviews where they had talked about exactly this topic, right? So like Hades is such a really good example of a game being so smart about using death as a story progression tool.
Yeah.
I mean, how have we not thought of this idea before in the industry? What is wrong with us? Right?
And roguelikes have been around for a while. The mechanic wasn't new. It was the narrative use in that mechanic that was clever and engaging.
Totally. And so smart. And it transformed a frustrating experience into a really satisfying one. Like dying didn't sting. You're like, oh, good.
Yep.
I'm going to find something else out.
Clever.
You know? Yes, very clever. So I would take the reins of my education because I don't think you can find it out there. Not yet. I mean, you can for sure, but like you want to be really in charge of finding out what it is you want to do and getting the information you need. The information is out there. The problem is there's just a ton of it. So you have to be very intentional, strategic, almost put blinders on. Like, I'm not going to overwhelm myself. I'm going to study one game at a time. I'm going to take X number of months. And in this X number of months, I'm going to really know Y number of games backwards and forwards in terms of their narrative design. Like, make a curriculum for yourself. Make a schedule, right? I'm going to spend 10 hours a week really figuring this out. I'm allowed 3 weeks to finish a game or whatever. Like, just make a schedule for yourself. I think that's really the way to do it. And, again, classes can be hugely helpful because classes take things from just like fire hose of random YouTube information and curates it for you. And the other thing about classes is that oftentimes we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
And classes can fill in that missing gap. And classes can provide accountability, really targeted assignments that really help you dig into places that you need to be digging into. And so there's a lot to be said for that. And that kind of education is available out there. But, whether you are in a class or you are doing this on your own, I think just a calendar and a journal and a list of your favorite games is what you need.
Right. Okay. Well, that's some of the ways to get started on it and some of the things to work on. I like it. That's good. Mm-hmm. To bring it back to the craft part of it for a second, because this just occurred to me, you're moving so many pieces, you're collaborating with lots of places, you have so much to consider. How do you maintain integrity of the story? And I don't want to get into player agency and all that. I'm just talking, how do you make a cohesive, engaging, and rewarding emotional narrative experience when you're juggling so many things?
Right. Well, yeah, it is tricky. There's no doubt about it. I think one of the ways is you just iterate a lot. You play test a lot. You're always, you're maybe an analogy that's going to be helpful here. You're in a boat and you've got your North Star, right? Or maybe another way of putting it is like you're on a plane from LA to New York. The plane isn't going straight to New York. The plane is off course most of the flight. It's constantly tacking like a boat. I'm mixing my metaphors here, but whether you're a boat or a ship or a plane or Superman, regardless, you're like checking your instruments. Okay, are we still flying to New York? Oh, no, we're going to Canada. Okay, a little more to this way, And I think that is where sometimes in the past, storytelling in games has fallen down because games and the narrative department and the design department somewhere along the way got real busy and stopped talking to each other. And so a big part of staying in sync is like give and take. And knowing that you're just trying things all along. Everything you're doing in game development is an experiment. So holding on loosely to things is like the key to mental health in games. Because you just aren't going to know until you try. And it may work, it may not. And you've got to be okay with letting things go that you were kind of in love with, but just aren't testing well.
Sounds like that work would have a very strong impact on the final emotional experience, game experience of a player. I'm curious, can you think of a game in your experience that you worked on or played where it really worked, or conversely, where it did not work and it's all because of not a person, but just somehow the narrative design fell down?
Well, I'm going to tell a story, and I don't know if this is a perfect example of the blurred line between writing and narrative design and audio, actually, and a bunch of other stuff. So this is a story of, and I'll be honest, it might be apocryphal. I wasn't in the room. I heard the story. Is it true? Is it not? I don't know. I like it, so I'm going to tell it. So the word on the street is, like, for one of the Uncharted games, there was a sequence where, I'm going to space on the name, but like Nathan Drake and his buddy, the older guy, were like scaling a wall together. It was co-op play or whatever it was. So the team had this, I'm assuming the narrative department had this incredible idea. So what they did was, because they needed to do the VO, the sort of the running commentary as this was happening. So they sat down with the recorder and the two level designers who had built this level. And they had these two guys, they happened to be guys, just talk trash the whole time they were playing the level. And here are these guys, they could play this level blindfolded, right? So, and also they knew each other really well. They'd collaborated on this stuff, right? So it was just like your classic trash talk between friends kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. But playing as themselves, not as the characters, because that's how we play games. Then they scheduled another playthrough with a recorder, and this time they invited in the actors who were going to voice the two characters. These guys had never played the level before, but as actors, they were very much in character. And so they were reacting with fresh eyes to things they had seen for the first time or were seeing for the first time. Mm-hmm. And then the narrative department took both of these recordings and smushed them together, sanded off the rough edges, added what was missing, and that became the script for that level. I think it's so smart because it really covers the bases. It really captures the player's mindset and it captures the character's mindset. And that is hard to do. And they found a really smart way to do it. And that, to me, to be honest, that's narrative design to me. It's like, how do we bring this story to life? What tools do we have at our disposal? And that narrative designer was like, we've got level designers at our disposal and we've got actors at our disposal. Let's use them. Yeah. That's awesome, in my opinion.
It maintains an organic feeling to the narrative, to the voiceover, to the script, and that hard to reach connection you've talked about before between the avatar and the player desires, and how those two have to at least somehow mash up, even if they're different.
Exactly. I know, and I feel like when you play this level, I feel like it's so fresh and it's so alive for exactly those reasons. I think that's the thing about when we talk about storytelling and we talk about interactive storytelling. I mean, this is it in a nutshell. You want the game to play with you, I mean, in ways big and small. I mean, I think the reason people responded the way they did to the original BioShock is that game played with you. You weren't playing the game, buddy. The game was playing you. But it was really fun and satisfying and incredible. And here it's a smaller example, I think. It's like, I imagine there must have been moments for players playing that level where the avatar said exactly what they were thinking.
That would be so cool.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. And that sense of responsiveness. And we can have that level of responsiveness now because our technology has evolved. We really can figure out design systems so that things trigger only at certain moments, but we can get really specific and finite with it. And that's where narrative design comes in. Like, technically you have the tools now and you've got the audience who's like, give it to me. Like, I really want this story to feel alive and real, not canned. And
yeah.
So,
wow.
Right?
Coolest job in the world.
Basically.
Do you think, I'm riffing now, this came to mind. Do you think there's going to someday be a subset, like a narrative designer who specializes in open world survival games where the story is discovered through environmental storytelling and set design, as opposed to somebody who works on something like Uncharted where you're dealing more with direct relationships and level design, and as opposed to an MMO where it's more quest design and world lore? Like, could it be niched down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really smart, honestly, because those are such different problem sets. Yeah, I think that, and we didn't even talk about technical narrative designers. Like, that's another part of the, continuum, and they really put the tech and technical. I mean, that is straight up like Are you programming? Yeah, kind of. So, but yeah, I think that that's really smart. And this is where, again, if you are an aspiring narrative designer, like, know thyself. If you have a real passion for certain types of games, this self-study thing that I am talking about doing, that deep dive, guess what? That is what you are going to be asked about in an interview. And you are going to be ready for those questions because you have spent the time and thought about it and you've got the insights. And I think going deep like that in some specific types of games is really smart because we need more breakthroughs. We need more narrative design breakthroughs. And that's going to come when people basically reach the edge of the map of their knowledge. In other words, okay, I've gone deep on this and I think I've learned so much from everybody. What more could we do? That's what we want. And so, yeah, absolutely. Special, whether you're a game writer or a narrative designer, I think knowing the kind of games and the kinds of stories that you really resonate with is just going to serve you well in your career.
I want to put it out there so that people don't think I stole your idea later. This summer, I actually started that process with survival crafting games. I have a list on a spreadsheet and I've been going through journaling and I'm working my way, like starting way back in the day, and I've been working my way, and right now I'm at Forest. But yeah, it's quite the process. You see the origins of mechanics that are used today, where they started, how they changed along the way. It's pretty wild. Like Unreal World, some of the stuff that was done in Unreal World way back in the day that is still being used today, and in the latest survival games. It's cool. But yes, I just want to put a pin in that so that I didn't steal that. That was same minds. Great minds.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, heck yes. I mean, ideas are out there. I love that you're doing that. That is so cool, especially taking that approach of like understanding the history of things. I mean, systems and mechanics can be replicated and are replicated. I mean, players want that. They love it. They love recognizing stuff. And so, yeah, how has technology and player expectations helped us evolve these mechanics and things is really cool. It's really charming to play a game from like, honestly, like 1982 or something and be like, hey.
No. I tracked down a copy of Fantasy, spelled with an IE at the end. It's a really old RPG game from probably 82, somewhere back there, and played it just for nostalgia, just because. Yeah, I'm with you. Just because. Okay, well, let's start moving towards the end here, shall we? So we're going to touch on narrative department in a second, but just to kind of bring this all together for me, looking at the broader picture, what do you think the future holds for narrative design and games? We kind of touched on it, but I don't know, where would you like to see narrative design go?
Well, I think that where I think we have the room for the biggest breakthroughs, there's an answer I used to give, which is still true, and I'm going to give it the new answer. So the old answer, I used to think the thing that was the bottleneck, the thing that was really holding us back was a lack of really good tools. So, the number one question I get from people is, what does a game script look like? And I'm always like, well,
depends.
Yeah, it depends. Right. Everyone's least favorite answer. It depends. But, and the really quick answer to that one is it looks like scripts and spreadsheets. Scripts are for the cutscenes and spreadsheets are for the in-game stuff. But it is messy and the tools are often homegrown. Like there's no final draft for the game industry. Different studios use different in-house tools and the tools are designed to work with their engine. So it's a whole kerfuffle and it's a big dumb mess. And I've always thought, God, once we get standardized tools that are much more user-friendly and easier to use, there's going to be this huge jump in quality of storytelling in games. And it's not because the writers suddenly got better. It's because the tools got better. I still think that is to some degree true. But I think the thing that's really going to move the needle is for us to develop a shared language between design and writing. I think there's an element of tribalism at work between the two departments. I think designers don't recognize writers as one of their own. And I think that there's something about, and again, I don't think this is malicious, but I think that the things that we're doing are often getting in each other's way, meaning the storytellers and the designers. So it's like, imagine dancing with someone, but you're stepping on each other's toes all the time. We need to learn how to move together through the dev cycle. And one of the ways that we as writers can make that dance work better is to really start to speak design. Not fluently, right? But like, let's get a phrase book. So at least we, we're in this strange country called design, and we have a phrase book so we know how to like order a meal in a restaurant and ask where the bathroom is. I mean, just enough to get by. Because I think that the degree of misunderstanding that goes on between story and design is mind-boggling. And that's where the narrative design role emerged, is to try to solve that problem. And we need that. And we just need everyone involved to just have the shared language to be able to be better collaborators. And so that's my hope. Big picture is where we're going to go.
I love it. That's a good, just to, I guess, kind of give a different look at that. I come from a background in graphic design and editorial and newspapers and magazines. Working at a magazine, I was in charge of the creative department interfacing with the editorial team. And it's kind of similar in that you have these, and what we discovered, it's a personality issue. The people you hire that are really good editorial writers and editors are very different than visual communications, typography, page layout people. So you need that person in the middle. We call them a traffic controller or a creative department supervisor. So to bring it all together, that's what a narrative designer is.
Yes. That's the special sauce that they can bring. And this is why, when we talk about like why studios really value people who are good team players and good collaborators, this is what they mean.
Yeah.
It's so important, and not everyone's got it, and so the people that do are just, diamonds.
Nice. Okay, we're going to move on, but the whole point of the scripts thing, I'm getting Joe Morrissey on the show eventually. We've been back and forth for months now, but
love him.
A conversation with Joe. You remember his GDC talk with the pitch document?
Yes.
I think that's cool. A third kind of script. I think the pitch, because it's kind of like a vision board, a world document that's like, here's the big picture. Here's the major beats. Here's the theme. Here's the feeling, the emotional payoffs we're going for. Mm-hmm. That kind of is kind of like in my brain anyways, kind of like a master script. And then you can build spreadsheets under that and character bios and setting descriptions and lore and culture. But that was, to me, that was like the moment, like, that's a document that sums up the narrative arc of the whole thing in a way that all the departments can understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would love to take it even one step further and make it like the emotional doc. The player's emotional doc, because I think that's where, there's a Venn diagram, like the way I describe writers and designers. The designers, their job is to find the fun, right? That's where all the prototyping and play testing, and that's why that job is so damn hard. Can you imagine if your job was to find the fun? Oh my God, it's very daunting. And I would argue that I think storytellers are really good at finding the feeling, right? Like the emotional journey and all that stuff. And these two circles don't have a ton of overlap. But where they do overlap is the player, right? Is the player. And so if you could create a document, a vibe, a mood board that really captures story and gameplay as part of that player experience, like that's the North Star, right? That's you're sailing towards.
You need to make that, Susan. Then you.
Ooh, okay.
Then teach it.
Challenge accepted.
I can't wait to see it. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's narrative designer for today. But I have my core questions I want to ask before we head out the door. But before we do, I want to bring us back to the narrative department for a second, because you do address a lot of the things we've talked about today. A lot of these things are in my brain because of the courses I took with Masterclass 1 and the pilot of Masterclass 2, which was a hell of an experience, and it will stick with me forever. And yeah, shout out to those people, because they're all crazy too.
Right, they're the best. Love them.
But that being said, I want to make a little space here for the classes so near and dear to my heart. What's happening at the narrative department? What are you working on? I've heard whispers, but I don't want to. What's cool and new that you can share with me?
Yes, fair. Okay, so of course we have. Well, we can start with, like, I'm doing workshops. I did them for a while and I'm bringing them back, and I'm really excited about that. That's going to be like every other month, 3-hour workshop. We're going to run one in October on Barks. I have a take on Barks that I think is really helpful, and in a spreadsheet we're going to work on together. You'll come out of that workshop with Barks and a really good understanding of how to write good ones. So we'll be doing something like that on a different topic of game writing every couple of months.
Cool.
And then, of course, we have our Masterclass 1, which is I'm very proud of it. Oh, my God. I mean, labor of love doesn't begin to cover it.
Is there an intake for that right now? Sorry.
No, it's a great question. So we open registration spring and fall. So if people join my mailing list, they will know when it opens. So the next round is going to open up right after GDC.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're actually running it right now. I think we're on week 1 of the fall cohort.
Nice.
Yeah. So spring and fall. And then for people who are like, I'm not done yet, we have Masterclass 2, as you know, which is now a full-fledged class.
Nice.
And that's really they're both for the same audience, but it's sort of meant to be Masterclass 2 gets more into the nuts and bolts of the work. I mean, I think it's because I think so much about writing for games is counterintuitive, and a lot of Masterclass 1, it's as much unlearning as it is learning. You know, it's like, okay, this is a whole different thing. It looks like other kinds of writing, and it is, except when it's not, and blah, blah, blah. So we really want to help writers get their heads wrapped around what this really is so that they can avoid stepping on a rake, for lack of a better word, at their first day at the work. Honestly, I stepped on plenty of rakes when I was coming up, and I was like, that hurt. I don't want to do that again. Yeah. God, my nose aches just thinking about it. So Masterclass 1 and 2 are yes, they're great. And then we're always thinking about what else we could be doing to help writers. You know, it's an ongoing thing. So something we're exploring right now, and it's not coming online anytime soon, but I'm really excited about it. One thing I've always wanted to do is help writers understand game design better for the reasons we've been talking about this entire episode. And I haven't taught that class because I'm not a designer and I don't pretend to be one. But I have found a designer whose name will not be mentioned yet. And he is coming on board to teach a new course. We're going to roll it out in 2025, Game Design for Writers. Nice. And it's really meant to help make them better, to learn to speak the language, have that shared language, and really understand what design's doing and how we fit in with it so we can be more effective collaborators. And honestly, I'm going to be a student in that class as much as a co-teacher. I cannot wait for someone to finally explain game design to me.
Well, if you're looking for guinea pigs for the pilot, you just you let me know.
Oh, I will. Don't you worry. I've got you on a list somewhere, buddy.
Excellent. I don't want to be on any more lists.
A secret list.
Yeah, they all are.
Oh, right. Good point. Well, I'll let you know when it's happening. But anyway, that's the kind of things we're really doing. We just want to keep supporting game writers and narrative designers because I think that it's an incredible time. And when story works in a game, it just completely transforms the experience. It's so powerful and amazing. And on a selfish level, I want to see more awesome games with awesome stories. So anything I can do to help make that happen, I'm here to do it.
Right on. What a worthy cause.
Well, you know, that whole curriculum was born out of me emailing my friends who work at studios and just asking them just one question, which is, what do you wish game writers knew before they show up at your studio? I know you train them, but there's got to be some skills they kind of need to have before they start. What are they? Complain to me. Tell me your problems. I'll see if I can solve them. So
nice.
Yeah, that's really the goal. So if it's working for them, then we're doing something right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to start heading for the door. I have a philosophical question. I always ask everybody. I can't remember if I asked you before, and I was going to look it up, but let's do it anyways. All right. So the question is, and if you've listened to a single show, you've probably heard it. In my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of the corner of story and game, but also improv, comedy, comic book writing, movies, films, plays, music, where we can all just hang out. There's a shared fellowship, a language, a connection. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what's the magical thread that holds that all together?
Ooh, you did not ask me this question.
Oh.
I think you asked me who I'd have at dinner.
Maybe.
That's how long it's been. Yeah. So it's a new one. Okay. What is the thing that holds it together? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to give a kind of a weird answer. I mean, this is based on working in games for 20 years, having loads of people in my life, some of whom are just pure game people and some of whom are pure story people and all in between. And who have I connected with and where have the great collaborations come and the great friends? It is this is so corny. I know someone's going to roll their eyes when they hear it, but I think it is some kind of just love for life. Because what we're doing is we're creating. And when you're creating, you're making something out of nothing. And that is such a leap of faith. And it's such a willingness to just surf the energy of life and just be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's just try some stuff. And it's especially fun if you're trying stuff with other people, right? I mean, I think when I think about the corner of story and game, I see the Muppet Show. Like backstage at the Muppet Show, like Gonzo is firing chickens out of a cannon and Sam the Eagle is getting really upset and Miss Piggy's doing whatever she's doing. And it's total chaos, but it's controlled chaos. And everyone's heart is in the right place, right? Everybody means well. Everyone just wants to put on a show by hook or by crook. And that, to me, that chaos is where the magic happens. I mean, yes, sure. Do we want to be more codified and systematic about our work? To some level, yeah. But at the same time, there's going to be some magic that disappears. So I kind of love the chaos. Yeah. And I think just having a good-natured attitude of like, we're just going to try. We're just going to do our best. No harm, no foul. Let's go for it.
That's a good answer. Technically, you had two answers. One is love of life, and the other one is chaos. But I like both of those answers.
They kind of feel the same to me.
Ooh. Well, that's deep. We could go down that hole sometime.
Yeah, I mean, isn't life just chaos defined? Just chaos and creativity and manifesting stuff and building stuff?
Isn't being an artist just embracing that chaos?
Exactly. And that's what's so magical about this, because we are working in a technical field.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like, I think the writers and designers put the ghost in the machine.
When you put constraints on chaos, that just makes things more powerful. Creativity becomes...
Yes. Controlled chaos is, again, Muppet Show. Like, the show goes on. Like, whether we've got it together or not, we go on at 8 o'clock, right? It's the same kind of thing. Like, okay, we're shipping this, guys.
Yep.
Let's just get it done. Yeah.
The video game industry is the Muppet Show. I like it.
Yes, me too.
All right. Okay, well, a couple quick fire questions, and then we'll be heading for the door. Okay. What are you reading these days?
Ooh, I am reading Babylon Berlin, which is the book that the TV series was based on. If people have not seen this show, I cannot recommend it enough for the world building aspect of it. I mean, you really feel like you are in 1920s Berlin, and it's so compelling. Like, anyone who loves rich character development and world building, this show has got it all. It's so good.
Right on. What are you playing these days?
I am, maybe related, I am playing Disco Elysium.
You're always playing Disco.
I mean, I am always playing it in my head forever. I got interrupted. I was actually doing a redo of Masterclass 1, and I was so busy that I just completely fell off the wagon. So I'm going to actually start it over. Nice. And I'm going to be a different kind of cop this time. I'm going to do better. I hope.
Very cool.
I think.
Okay, last quick fire. If your essence, the essence of Susan, was distilled down and injected into a game, either digital, tabletop, role-playing, board game, whatever, probably digital, what game or world would it be, and what would your race, class, stereotype be? Character.
Are you ready for my answer?
Yeah.
It's going to really disappoint you.
It's not Disco Elysium, is it?
It's not. It's not. It's Katamari Damacy.
Oh.
Yes. That's me. That's 100% me. Just trying and trying. Little inchling prince. Nothing makes sense. Doesn't matter. Keep going. It's so me.
There you go. Yeah, I should have thought of that, actually. I should
it's a blur, but that blur is a gift. It's actually a Damacy.
Nice.
It's an inchling prince and it's Katamari. I mean...
That's a good answer.
The best part of that thing, that Katamari, it's magnetized.
So it actually picks stuff up?
I could roll it across my desk and it picks up all of my paper clips.
I would be doing that for hours. My ADHD would just take right over.
It's out of reach for a reason.
I am not going to look that up right now and find where to buy one. Nope. Hey. That's all. We're done. Before I push you out the door into the cold, do you have any parting words of wisdom? I want to give you the final word.
My final word of wisdom is that creative life just requires courage. And courage does not mean not being afraid. Courage means being afraid and doing it anyway. And there's no guarantees for anybody doing anything. So I really just, if I could speak to my younger self or my students now, it's just, if you are feeling this and you don't do it, you will always wonder what if, and that will drive you crazy. I think I would just so much rather see people just say yes to what's inside of them and just go on that journey and just see where it takes you. The creative life is just a messy, chaotic one, and that's a feature, not a bug, and honestly, it's part of the fun. I mean, all you have to do is just take that first step, whatever that is, and the universe will take it from there.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. It looks like the dancing silverware is signaling that it's time to close up Tavern, and they probably need a good polishing. But before we go, thank you again to Susan for sharing your insights on narrative design and what it truly means to be a narrative designer. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, keep creating, exploring, and sharing those stories and worlds. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of Story and Game.